The rain was hitting the window so hard I couldn't hear my own breathing. David stood by the door, his hand on the light switch, looking at me with a version of love that felt like a threat. He whispered, "Just do this for us," and I felt my stomach drop into my shoes. I looked at the two men sitting on our sofa, their expressions unreadable and stiff. They were young, barely 25, and they looked as uncomfortable as I felt. David didn't see their discomfort or mine. He only saw the fantasy he'd been building in his head for 3 years. I should have walked out then. I should have grabbed my keys and never looked back. Instead, I stayed. We had been married for 12 years. We met in college, bought a house in the suburbs, and had Sunday dinners with his parents. Our life was a series of predictable, safe choices. David was a provider, someone who liked to have everything in its right place. I loved that about him at first. It felt like security. We never fought about money or chores, and our neighbors called us the golden couple. But behind the quiet, David was changing. It started with the way he looked at me during dinner. He began commenting on what I wore, pushing me to be more adventurous, more provocative. At first, I thought he was just trying to keep the spark alive. I wanted to be that woman for him. I wanted to be the one who could keep him interested after a decade of the same routine. But the interest wasn't about me anymore. It was about who else could see me. He started suggesting we go to clubs we had no business being in. He'd point out younger men and ask me what I thought of them. It felt like a game. A weird, slightly off-putting game that I played along with because I didn't want to be the boring wife. He would lean in close at a bar and whisper, "Wouldn't it be exciting if they knew what we did when we got home?" I'd laugh it off, thinking it was just talk, just a way to spice up our suburban reality. I didn't realize he was laying the groundwork. I didn't see the cage being built until the door was already clicking shut. He started showing me videos, asking me questions that made my skin crawl. I told him it wasn't for me. I told him I loved him, and that was enough. He'd just smile and tell me I was being old-fashioned. He said I was keeping myself from true freedom. It happened on a Tuesday. David told me he'd met 2 guys at the gym who were looking for some freelance marketing work. He said he'd invited them over for a drink to discuss a project he was starting. I didn't think anything of it. I made a cheese plate and put on a nice sweater, the way a good hostess does. When Marcus and Terrence walked in, the energy in the room shifted instantly. They were polite, professional, and clearly confused about why they were there. David wasn't talking about marketing. He was talking about connections and expanding horizons. He kept pouring them heavy drinks, his hand shaking slightly as he held the decanter. He kept moving me closer to them on the couch, his arm draped over my shoulder like he was showcasing a prize. I felt a flush of heat in my neck. Marcus looked at me, then at David, then back at his glass. He knew. He could sense the desperation coming off my husband. David's hand was on my lower back, pushing me forward. He said, "My wife thinks you two are very impressive." I felt the lie burn in my throat. I hadn't said that. I hadn't said anything at all. I looked at David, trying to catch his eye, trying to send a silent signal to stop this right now. He wouldn't look at me. He was watching them. He was watching their reaction to me, his eyes wide and hungry. It wasn't about me being attractive. It was about him owning the moment. He told them I was lonely while he worked late. The word felt like a slap. I wasn't lonely. I was right there, sitting next to him. But to David, I was just a prop in a story he was writing. He told them to stay for another round. He told me to go change into the dress he'd bought me the week before, the one with the open back that I'd said made me feel exposed. I hesitated, my heart hammering against my ribs. David's voice went low and sharp, a tone he'd never used in front of guests. "Just go put it on, Sarah. Don't be rude." The dress felt like paper against my skin. I stood in the bathroom, staring at myself in the mirror, wondering how I'd ended up here. I could hear their muffled voices in the living room. David was laughing, that loud, forced laugh he used when he was trying to dominate a conversation. I wanted to lock the door and wait until they left, but I was scared. Not of the men, but of the look I'd see in David's eyes if I failed him. He'd been telling me for months that I was too repressed, that I was holding our marriage back. When I came back out, the room was dim. David had turned off the main lights, leaving only the floor lamp on. It cast long, jagged shadows across the hardwood. Marcus looked away as soon as I entered. Terrence just stared at his feet, his fingers drumming nervously on his knee. They were young, maybe 23. They were just kids looking for a professional break, and they'd walked into a nightmare. David sat me down between them. The air was thick with the smell of David's expensive bourbon. He started talking about how he wanted me to experience something new. He told them he wouldn't mind. He said he actually preferred it. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't a choice. It was a command wrapped in a suggestion. He started showing them photos on his phone. Photos of me I didn't know he'd taken while I was sleeping or getting dressed. Private photos. I reached for the phone, but he pulled it away. "Let them see how beautiful you are," he said. I looked at Marcus. He looked back with a mix of pity and hunger. That was the worst part. The pity. I wasn't a wife anymore. I was a transaction. David got up to get more ice, leaving the three of us in the dark. The silence was heavy. Marcus whispered, "Is this really what you want?" I couldn't answer. If I said no, I was betraying my husband. If I said yes, I was betraying myself. I heard David's footsteps in the kitchen, slow and rhythmic. He was waiting. He was listening to see if I would comply. I felt like I was drowning in my own living room. David came back, but he didn't sit down. He stood behind the couch, his hands heavy on my shoulders. He leaned down and whispered into my ear, his breath hot against my skin. "If you love me, you'll show me." He took my hand and placed it on Marcus's knee. My heart was thumping so hard I thought it would burst. Marcus didn't move. He was frozen, caught between his own morals and the strange power David was wielding. Terrence reached out and touched my hair. It was a soft touch, almost kind, which made it so much worse. David gave me a little shove. "Go on," he said. His voice wasn't kind anymore. It was an order. I looked at him, one last plea for him to stop this, to take it back. He just nodded toward them, his eyes glassy and fixed. So I did it. I kissed Marcus. Then I turned to Terrence. I did everything David told me to do while he watched from the shadows of the armchair. He didn't participate. He just watched. He had this look of pure, terrifying triumph on his face. I wasn't a person to him in that moment. I was a trophy he was sharing to prove he could. The room felt small. The air felt thin. Every touch felt like a bruise. I kept my eyes closed, trying to pretend I was somewhere else. But David's voice kept pulling me back. "Tell them you like it, Sarah. Tell them." I said the words. I said them because I wanted it to be over. I said them because I was broken. When they left, they didn't look at me. They practically ran out the front door, leaving their half-finished drinks on the coffee table. The silence they left behind was deafening. David was beaming. He tried to hug me, told me I was incredible, told me our marriage was stronger than ever. I felt like I was made of glass that had already shattered. I went to the bathroom and scrubbed my skin until it was red. I couldn't get the smell of their cologne or David's triumph off me. For the next week, David acted like a honeymooner. He bought me flowers. He took me out to dinner. But he'd bring it up constantly. He'd ask me details about how it felt. He wanted to relive it every night before we went to sleep. I realized then that he didn't love me. He loved the power he had over me. He loved that he could break my boundaries, and I'd still stay. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. Every time the phone rang, I jumped, terrified it was Marcus or Terrence calling to demand something else. I was terrified of what they thought of me. I was just a suburban wife who let her husband auction her off for an afternoon. The resentment started to grow, a cold, hard stone in my chest. I looked at David across the breakfast table and felt nothing but revulsion. He'd talk about next time. He'd mention other guys he saw at the gym. He thought he'd opened a door. He didn't realize he'd burnt the house down while I was still inside it. I started keeping a bag packed in the trunk of my car. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay in that house. The normal life we had was a lie. It was always a lie. I realized he'd been grooming me for this for years. Every comment, every dress, every small boundary he pushed was leading to that Tuesday. I wasn't his partner. I was his experiment, and the experiment was over. I left on a rainy Tuesday, exactly 1 month after that night. David was at work, thinking everything was perfect. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing left to say that he would actually hear. He would just turn my words into another fantasy, another way to twist my feelings. I moved into a small apartment 3 towns over. I changed my number. I started seeing a therapist. Though I couldn't bring myself to tell her the whole truth for a long time, I still see his car in every parking lot. I still hear his voice when a room gets too quiet. He tried to find me, of course. He sent emails talking about how he sacrificed for my pleasure. He still doesn't get it. He never will. I'm not the same person I was before he opened that door. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust a man again. Every time someone is kind to me, I look for the hook. I look for the hidden agenda. I live a quiet life now. I don't go to bars. I don't wear that dress. I just try to forget the look on his face while he watched me break. The worst part isn't what happened with those 2 men. The worst part is knowing that if David walked through my door and asked me again today, a part of me would still be too afraid to say no.